The evening sun glinted off chrome and polished metal as engines rumbled across Riverdale Speedway. Through the haze of exhaust and dust, a battered blue pickup truck lurched into the competitor's entrance, its rusted fenders and mismatched door jarring against the gleaming modified cars surrounding it. Behind the wheel, Maggie Reeves gripped the steering wheel tight enough to whiten her knuckles. Life as a single mother in a small town had taught her that mockery could cut deeper than any knife. But sometimes, the very thing people laughed at was the one that could save everything you loved. When her son's medical bills threatened to take their home, she entered the one thing of value she had left: her late father's meticulously maintained engine hidden beneath that rusted hood. Little did she know that her desperate decision would echo across the racing world, bringing sponsors with contract offers to her doorstep 7 nights later. The summer heat radiated from the asphalt of Riverdale Speedway's parking area, waves of it distorting the air above the crowded lot. Maggie hesitated before cutting the engine, knowing what awaited her. The truck, a 1978 Ford F-150 that had been her father's pride, looked like it belonged in a junkyard from the outside. 15 years of hard work, Appalachian winters and no money for cosmetic repairs had left the exterior a patchwork of rust spots, dents and mismatched paint, where she'd touched up the worst areas with whatever was available. The interior wasn't much better. Cracked vinyl seats mended with duct tape, a dashboard held together with epoxy and determination, and a floor mat that had long ago surrendered to holes worn through by work boots. But beneath that weathered hood purred an engine that represented every spare hour her father had spent in their garage before cancer took him 3 years ago. Beside her, 12-year-old Danny fidgeted with excitement, his thin face animated, in a way Maggie rarely saw anymore. Not since the diagnosis 6 months ago, not since the medical bills had started piling up on their kitchen table, not since she'd taken a second job that still wasn't enough. "They're staring, Mom," he said, his enthusiasm dimming as he noticed the heads turning toward their vehicle, the smirks, the not-so-subtle pointing. "Let them," Maggie replied, summoning a confidence she didn't feel. She tucked a strand of brown hair behind her ear and reached for the worn satchel containing her entry paperwork. "We're not here for them." At 34, Maggie's face, already, showed the lines of someone who had weathered more storms than most. Raising Danny alone since he was 3, working as a mechanic at Johnson's Auto 6 days a week while picking up night shifts at Hank's Diner on weekends, it had carved determination into her features alongside the worry. Her hands were calloused, nails short and practical, often stained with grease, despite her best efforts to scrub them clean. As they exited the truck, the murmurs were immediate and undisguised. "Someone tell her this ain't a demolition derby," a voice called out, followed by laughter. "Probably took a wrong turn looking for the junkyard," another added. Maggie kept her eyes forward, one hand on Danny's shoulder, as they walked toward the registration booth. The annual Riverdale Amateur Stock Car Race had a $20,000 prize for the winner, money that would cover Danny's treatments for almost 6 months. It was the only hope she had left after the bank's final notice had arrived yesterday, giving her 30 days before foreclosure proceedings began. The registration official, a balding man with a sunburned nose and a Riverdale Speedway polo shirt, looked up as they approached, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Maggie's faded jeans and flannel shirt among the racing jumpsuits and team gear surrounding them. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, the skepticism barely concealed in his voice. "I'm here to register for the amateur division," Maggie said, sliding her paperwork across the table. "Maggie Reeves." The man glanced at her forms, then back at her, then over her shoulder toward the rusty truck visible in the parking area. That's what you're planning to race. The form says stock vehicles, modified engine class." "That's what I've got." Danny stood straighter beside her. "My mum's truck has the best engine in 3 counties. My grandpa built it." The official's expression softened slightly at the boy's defense. He reviewed the paperwork, checking her driver's license against the entry form. Everything seems to be in order, but... He hesitated, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, you do understand this is a serious competition. Some of these drivers have been racing for years." "I understand the rules," Maggie replied evenly. "I paid the entry fee. Is there a problem?" After a moment, he shook his head and stamped her form. "Vehicle inspection is at Garage 3. Track qualifying starts at 5. He handed her a numbered decal for her vehicle and a participant's badge. "Good luck. You're gonna need it." As they walked toward the inspection area, they passed clusters of competitors, mostly men in their 20s and 30s, gathered around vehicles that gleamed with fresh paint and sponsor decals. The amateur division allowed modified stock vehicles rather than purpose-built race cars, but even these had clearly benefited from significant investments. Custom exhaust systems, performance tires, aerodynamic modifications, advantages Maggie couldn't begin to afford. The conversation stalled as they passed, replaced by poorly concealed chuckles and outright stares. One man, tall with a carefully trimmed goatee and a leather racing jacket emblazoned with Carson Motorsports, stepped directly into their path. "Well now, what do we have here?" he drawled, looking Maggie up and down before glancing back at her truck. "Honey, I think you misunderstood. This is a race, not a charity car wash." Several of his companions laughed. The patches on his jacket identified him as Scott Carson, 3-time winner of the Riverdale Amateur Circuit. "Excuse us," Maggie said firmly, attempting to steer Danny around the man. Carson stepped sideways, blocking their path again. "I'm just trying to save you some embarrassment. That heap won't make it through the first turn without falling apart." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Or maybe you're just here for attention. Single mom story might get you on the local news even when you come in last." Maggie felt Danny tense beside her, saw his thin shoulders square up as if preparing to defend her. She squeezed his hand in warning. He couldn't afford the exertion of anger with his condition. "The only attention I'm interested in is from the finish line," she replied coolly. "Now please move." Something in her tone must have registered because Carson stepped aside, though his smirk remained firmly in place. "Your funeral," he shrugged. "Just keep that rust bucket out of my way on the track." They continued toward Garage 3, Danny's face flushed with indignation. "Why do you let them talk to you like that, Mom? You could beat any of them." Maggie sighed. "People judge what they can see, Danny. Let them underestimate us. It just makes proving them wrong that much sweeter." The vehicle inspection was, as she had anticipated, an ordeal. The inspector, a gray-haired man with deeply tanned skin and the weathered hands of someone who had spent decades working with engines, circled her truck with increasing disbelief. "You're seriously entering this?" he asked, tapping a rusted fender that rang hollow in response. "Just check the engine," Maggie replied. With evident skepticism, he motioned for her to pop the hood. The moment it lifted, his expression transformed. Beneath the battered exterior lay an immaculate engine bay, gleaming chrome, perfectly arranged components, and modifications that spoke of hundreds of hours of expert attention. "Holy," he whispered, leaning in closer, "is that a custom-ported Cleveland block with twin turbos?" Maggie allowed herself a small smile. 454 cubic inch big block Chevy with aluminum heads, hand-built by my father. I've maintained it myself. Since he passed, the inspector let out a low whistle as he examined the setup more closely. "This is unexpected." He glanced at her with new respect. "You know your way around an engine, I take it?" "I'm the head mechanic at Johnson's Auto. Have been for 8 years." He nodded slowly, making notes on his clipboard. "Body's not going to win any beauty contests, but structurally it's sound. Safety equipment is up to code." He stamped her inspection form. "You're cleared to qualify." As they walked away, Danny was practically bouncing. "Did you see his face, Mom, when he saw the engine?" "I saw," she said, allowing herself to relax slightly. The first hurdle cleared. "Do we call Uncle Ray now?" Danny asked. Maggie checked her watch. "He should be here soon. Let's get the truck to our assigned spot first." Ray Dawson wasn't actually Danny's uncle, but he'd been Maggie's father's best friend and had assumed the honorary title years ago. As the owner of Dawson's salvage yard, he had supplied many of the parts that had gone into the truck's engine over the years, and more importantly, he was the only person besides Maggie who truly understood what her father had built. They found their designated spot in the competitors' area, a small section of asphalt marked with their racing number, 87, situated at the very end of the row, farthest from the track entrance. Another subtle reminder that they were outsiders here. Maggie backed the truck into position, then retrieved the minimal tools and supplies she had brought from the bed. A basic toolkit, coolant, a few quarts of oil, and the racing helmet that had been her father's. It looked woefully inadequate next to the elaborate setup surrounding them, with their professional tool chests, spare parts, and team members in matching uniforms. "Mom!" Danny's voice had that cautious quality it took on when he was worried about her feelings. "Why are all those people taking pictures of our truck?" Maggie turned to see a small crowd had gathered at the edge of their spot, smartphones raised, expressions ranging from amused to incredulous. She heard snippets of conversation. "Seriously thinks that piece of junk can race." Heard she's some single mum trying to get famous. Betting she doesn't even qualify. Before she could respond, a booming voice cut through the chatter. "Well, if it isn't the finest sleeper I've seen in 20 years. The crowd parted as Ray Dawson approached, 6'3", barrel-chested, with a grey beard that reached mid-chest and arms like tree trunks. Despite being in his 60s, he moved with the energy of a much younger man, and the respect he commanded was evident in how quickly the onlookers dispersed under his challenging gaze. "Uncle Ray!" Danny launched himself at the big man, who caught him in a bear hug that lifted him off his feet. "Easy there, champ," Ray laughed, setting him down gently. "How you feeling today?" "Good. Mom's going to qualify in less than an hour." Ray turned to Maggie, embracing her with the same enthusiasm. "Jack would be so damn proud," he whispered in her ear before releasing her. "I'm not sure about that," she replied quietly. "Using his truck for this, it's a gamble." "A gamble? That man built this engine to race. He just never got the chance." Ray moved to the truck, running a hand almost reverently over the hood. "Besides, we're not gambling. We know what this beauty can do." From the toolbox in his pickup, Ray produced equipment Maggie couldn't have afforded: a professional tire pressure gauge, high-performance fuel, specialized tools for last-minute adjustments. He had even brought a small air compressor to ensure the tires were inflated to precise racing specifications. As they prepared, Maggie caught Danny watching the other racers with their teams of supporters, their sponsors' logos prominently displayed, their confidence evident in every movement. In their corner, it was just the three of them, a single mom, a salvage yard owner, and a 12-year-old boy with medical bills that threatened to take everything they had. "We don't need all that," she told him, following his gaze. "We've got something better." "What's that?" Danny asked. "Something to race for." The qualifying announcement came over the loudspeaker, calling drivers to their vehicles. Maggie changed into the fireproof racing suit Ray had brought, another expense she couldn't have managed on her own, and secured her father's helmet. "The engine's running perfect," Ray assured her as he helped check the safety harness. "Remember, in qualifying, it's just you against the clock. Don't worry about showing everything she can do yet. Just get a decent time to make the cut." Maggie nodded, suddenly aware of how long it had been since she'd actually raced. Backroad sprints with her father as a teenager, the occasional isolated straightaway when she was testing the truck's maintenance. Nothing like a professional track with barriers, turns, and other competitors. "You've got this, Mum." Danny said, his eyes bright with absolute faith as he handed her the worn leather gloves that had been her father's. Maggie swallowed hard, overcome by a sudden wave of emotion. 6 months ago, they'd been in a hospital room when the doctor had explained about Danny's rare blood disorder, the treatments he would need, the specialists, the medications that their insurance barely covered. That night, lying awake and calculating numbers that never added up, she had made a promise to herself and to him. She would find a way. "I've got this," she agreed, tugging on the gloves. She kissed the top of his head and climbed into the truck. The line of vehicles moved slowly toward the track entrance. Maggie's truck, with its rattling body and mismatched paint, drew stares and pointing fingers from the gathering crowd in the grandstands. The announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers as each competitor approached the starting line for their individual qualifying runs. Next up, number 23, Justin Blake. In his Chevrolet Camaro, 3-time finalist in the Western Regional Circuit, the sleek black Camaro roared onto the track, its engine growling as it accelerated away from the starting line. From her position in line, Maggie could see the digital board displaying qualifying times. The current leader was, unsurprisingly, Scott Carson, with a time of 32.18 seconds around the half-mile oval. To qualify for the final race, she would need to be among the top 16 times. As each competitor completed their run, the gap to 16th place narrowed. 38.45 seconds was the current cutoff by the time there were only 3 vehicles ahead of her. The pressure built in her chest, not just the normal pre-race jitters, but the weight of everything riding on this moment. The truck ahead of her pulled onto the track, a well-maintained Ford F-100 with custom graphics and aftermarket exhaust that rumbled impressively as it took off. Maggie closed her eyes briefly, running through the track layout in her mind, visualizing each turn, each straight, the exact points where she would brake and accelerate. And next up, the announcer's voice faltered slightly. Number 87. Maggie Reeves in a 1978 Ford pickup." There was a ripple of laughter from the stands, quickly followed by murmurs of confusion and curiosity. Most of the spectators had come expecting the usual parade of muscle cars and performance trucks. Maggie's vehicle stood out like a relic from another era. "Wonder if they're filming a comedy," someone called out loudly enough for her to hear. She ignored it, pulling up to the starting line. The official gave her a somewhat sympathetic look before raising the green flag. Maggie took a deep breath, her left foot pressing the clutch to the floor, her right maintaining steady pressure on the gas pedal. The engine responded with a deep rumble that silenced some of the laughter, a sound incongruous with the truck's appearance. The flag dropped. Maggie released the clutch and the truck shot forward with startling acceleration, the front end lifting slightly as the powerful engine transferred its energy through the carefully balanced drivetrain. She felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as the speedometer climbed rapidly, 40, 60, 80 miles per hour in a blur of seconds. The first turn approached, and she braked hard before downshifting and powering through the curve. The truck's body rolled more than a lower purpose-built racing vehicle would have, but her father had installed a custom suspension system that kept it manageable. What the truck lacked in aerodynamics and weight distribution, it made up for in raw power. The back straight allowed her to open up the engine fully. The speedometer nudged past 110 as the grandstand became a smear of color in her peripheral vision. She was vaguely aware of the announcer's voice rising in surprise, but her focus remained absolute. The track, the truck, the perfect line. Through each turn, as she crossed the finish line and began to decelerate, she glanced at the digital board. 47 seconds, currently 8th position, comfortably within qualifying. The crowd's reaction was a mixture of stunned silence and scattered applause as Maggie guided the truck back to the competitors' area. Ray and Danny were waiting, both grinning widely. "You qualified!" Danny shouted, jumping up and down despite his mother's frequent cautions about overexertion. "8th place!" Ray clapped a massive hand on her shoulder as she climbed out. "Told you, Jack built her to race." Maggie removed her helmet, unable to suppress her own smile. "That was just qualifying. The actual race will be different. Other cars on the track, more laps, different strategy." "Did you see their faces?" Danny asked, mimicking an exaggerated look of shock. "When you took off from the starting line?" Before she could answer, a small cluster of people approached their spot. A man in a Riverdale Speedway polo shirt led the group, which included 2 women with notepads and a younger man with a camera. "Ms. Reeves, I'm Tom Williams, event coordinator," the man introduced himself. "These folks are from the Riverdale Gazette and WKRP News. They'd like a word, if you don't mind. We don't often see, well, a vehicle like yours qualifying so well." Maggie hesitated, uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm just here to race," which is exactly what makes it interesting, one of the reporters interjected. "Single mom in a rust bucket qualifying ahead of guys who've spent thousands on their vehicles? That's a story." Danny tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, remember what you said about the medical bills? Maybe this could help." He was right, of course. Any publicity might attract sponsors or donations for Danny's medical fund. She had set up a crowdfunding page months ago that had barely generated enough for one treatment. "All right," she agreed reluctantly, "but I need to prep for the race while we talk." As Ray began checking over the truck, Maggie answered questions while keeping her hands busy, with minor adjustments to the engine. "What made you decide to enter the race?" the newspaper reporter asked. Maggie hesitated, then decided honesty was the simplest approach. "My son needs specialized medical treatment that our insurance doesn't fully cover. The prize money would help." "And the truck?" the television reporter prompted. "It's not what most people would choose for racing." "It was my father's. He spent 20 years perfecting the engine before he passed away from cancer. Everything that matters is under the hood, not on the outside." The reporter nodded, clearly recognizing the potential human interest angle. "Your son mentioned medical bills. Would you mind sharing more about that situation?" Maggie glanced at Danny, who nodded encouragingly. "He has a rare blood disorder called diamond blackfan anemia. The treatments are expensive, and we're facing foreclosure on our home because of the medical debt." The camera operator moved to include Danny in the frame as the reporter continued. "So today isn't just about racing for you." "No," Maggie replied, tightening a connection with more force than necessary. "It's about survival." The interview continued for several minutes before the race officials called for all qualified drivers to attend a pre-race briefing. As Maggie walked toward the officials' tent, she became aware of the changed atmosphere. Competitors who had laughed earlier now watched her with reassessing eyes. Some nodded respectfully. Others seemed irritated by the attention she had drawn. Scott Carson stood with his team near the entrance to the tent, his previous amusement replaced by a calculated stare as she approached. "Nice qualifying run," he said, the words carrying no warmth. "Didn't expect that kind of performance from something that belongs in a junkyard." "Thanks," Maggie replied neutrally, moving to step past him. He shifted, not quite blocking her path, but making his presence impossible to ignore. "Just so we're clear, your sob story might impress the reporters, but on the track you're just another competitor. Don't expect any special treatment." "I never asked for any." Carson leaned closer, lowering his voice. "My sponsors expect me to win. I've got too much invested to let some desperate housewife with a charity case make me look bad." The calculated cruelty of the words stung, but Maggie kept her expression impassive. She'd dealt with worse at the garage. Customers who refused to believe a woman could be a competent mechanic, male employees who had quit rather than work under her supervision, vendors who asked to speak to the man in charge. Then I suggest you focus on your driving instead of worrying about mine, she replied evenly, brushing past him into the tent. The briefing was straightforward. Details about flag signals, safety procedures, race format. The main event would be 50 laps, with a mandatory pit stop between laps 15 and 35. In the amateur division, pit crews were limited to 3 people, and only basic maintenance could be performed. Tire changes, refueling, windshield, cleaning, and minor adjustments. Throughout the briefing, Maggie was conscious of the sideways glances from the other competitors, no longer dismissive but wary, calculating. She had become a variable they hadn't accounted for, and racers, like most athletes, disliked unpredictability. When she returned to her spot, Ray had the hood up and was making final adjustments. Danny sat nearby, looking pale and tired but stubbornly, refusing to show it. "You should rest," Maggie told him immediately. "Find some shade. The race won't start for another hour." "I'm fine," he insisted. "Did they say anything about the pit stop rules?" Ray looked up. "Pit stop? We didn't plan for that." "It's mandatory," Maggie explained. "Between laps 15 and 35, we need a third person for the crew. 1 for fuel, 1 for tires, 1 for the windshield and any quick adjustments." They exchanged troubled glances. They had no team, no proper equipment. Ray had brought basic tools and some fuel, but nothing like the specialized gear the other teams were preparing. Pneumatic tire wrenches, specialized fuel cans designed for rapid emptying, coordinated crew members in matching fireproof suits. "I can help," Danny offered immediately. "Absolutely not," Maggie and Ray responded in unison. "It's too dangerous," Maggie added, "and you're not supposed to exert yourself." "I could just wipe the windshield," Danny pressed. "That's not dangerous or hard." Ray shook his head. "Pit lane is no place for a kid, buddy. Too many ways to get hurt, even doing something simple." "We'll figure something out," Maggie assured them both, though she had no immediate solution in mind. As they debated their options, a shadow fell across the truck. Maggie looked up to see the vehicle inspector from earlier, the grey-haired man who had been impressed by her engine. "Heard you've got a pit crew problem," he said without preamble. Maggie straightened. "Word travels fast." "Small racing community," he shrugged. "I'm off duty once the race starts. Was planning to watch from the pits anyway. I could lend a hand if you need a third." The offer was unexpected. "Why would you do that?" The man, Jenkins according to his name badge, gestured toward the engine. "Been inspecting cars at this track for 23 years. When you see something built with that kind of craftsmanship, you want to see what it can really do." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "And I heard about your boy. My grandson had leukemia last year. I know about medical bills." Maggie felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. We'd appreciate the help." "Call me Mike," he replied. "I'll bring what equipment I can. Won't be fancy, but it'll get the job done." As he walked away, Danny looked up at his mother with cautious hope. "That was lucky." "Maybe," Maggie replied, watching as Mike Jenkins stopped to speak with another official across the way. "Or maybe there are still good people in the world." With the pit crew problem temporarily solved, they focused on final preparations. Ray explained exactly what fuel they were using, a specially formulated high-octane mix that would maximize the engine's performance without causing excessive wear. Maggie checked and rechecked tire pressures, belt tensions, fluid levels, all the small details that could make the difference between finishing the race and breaking down halfway through. The public address system crackled with an announcement calling all drivers to bring their vehicles to the staging area. The grandstands were now packed with spectators, the pre-race excitement palpable even at a distance. Local amateur races, like this one, were major events in small communities like Riverdale, drawing crowds from surrounding counties and occasionally talent scouts from professional racing circuits. As Maggie prepared to drive to the staging area, Danny hugged her fiercely. "You're going to win," he said with absolute conviction. "I'm going to try," she corrected gently. "No," he insisted, pulling back to meet her eyes. "You're going to win. I can feel it. And then we can pay for the treatments and save the house. And everything will be okay again." The simple faith in his voice nearly broke her. How could she explain that even if she won today, their problems wouldn't magically disappear? The prize money would help, certainly, might even buy them enough time to find a more sustainable solution, but Danny's condition would require ongoing treatment for years. Instead, she hugged him back, careful not to squeeze too hard. His frame felt so fragile beneath her arms, a constant reminder of what was at stake. "I love you," she said, "more than anything. I love you too, Mom." He stepped back, assuming a more businesslike expression that mimicked Ray's. "Now go show them what this truck can do." Maggie guided the truck toward the staging area, the engine's rumble vibrating through the floorboards. Around her, the other qualifying vehicles formed a procession of gleaming paint and sponsor decals, each one representing thousands of dollars in investment. Her rusty F-150 stood out like a weed in a manicured garden, drawing stares from spectators. Lining the fence, the race officials directed each vehicle to its starting position, determined by qualifying times. As the 8th fastest qualifier, Maggie would start in the 4th row, with 3 cars ahead of her and 3 behind. Scott Carson's red Mustang sat prominently in the pole position, its custom paint job catching the afternoon sun. As she maneuvered into place, Maggie became acutely aware of the cameras focusing on her truck. The local news crew that had interviewed her earlier had been joined by photographers from several regional publications, all drawn by the unusual story of the single Mom in the Rust Bucket. She kept her eyes forward, focusing on the track ahead, rather than the attention surrounding her. A race official approached each vehicle, confirming that drivers were properly secured with safety harnesses and helmets. When he reached Maggie's truck, he peered in with a hint of concern. "Everything okay in there?" he asked, eyeing the truck's interior skeptically. "Everything that matters," Maggie replied, patting the dashboard that her father had reassembled countless times over the years. The official nodded and moved on. Through her side mirror, Maggie could see Ray and Danny making their way to the pit area, where Mike Jenkins was already waiting with a collection of borrowed equipment. The sight of her son's thin figure moving through the crowd sent a fresh wave of determination coursing through her. This wasn't about proving anything to the other racers or the spectators. This was about the stack of medical bills on her kitchen table and the foreclosure notice tucked into her work locker. The announcer's voice boomed across the speedway. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 43rd Annual Riverdale Stock Car Challenge. We've got 16 qualified drivers ready to battle it out over 50 laps for a prize of $20,000. The crowd roared its approval, the sound washing over the starting grid like a wave. "And we've got quite a story developing here. Today," the announcer continued, "in 8th position, Maggie Reeves in a 1978 Ford pickup that's, well, folks, you just have to see it to believe it. This single mom shocked everyone in qualifying, and she's racing today to help pay for her son's medical treatments." Maggie grimaced behind her visor. She hadn't wanted this much attention, but now that it was happening, she could only hope it might lead to some donations for Danny's medical fund, regardless of the race outcome. "Drivers, start your engines." 16 engines roared to life simultaneously. The combined sound reverberating through the speedway, Maggie felt the familiar surge of the big block Chevy, the power barely contained beneath her foot. The truck might look like a relic, but her father had built that engine to deliver when it mattered most. The pace car pulled onto the track, a new Corvette with Riverdale Speedway emblazoned on its doors. As it passed the starting grid, each competitor fell into formation behind it, maintaining the ordered start as they circled the track at increasing speed. Maggie settled into 4th row, conscious of the Dodge Charger ahead of her and the customized Toyota Tundra behind. Through her windshield, she could see Carson's Mustang at the front of the pack, its exhaust pipes emitting a carefully tuned growl. The pace car maintained speed through one complete circuit, then a second, allowing the drivers to warm their tires and engines while the flagman prepared for the start. As they rounded the final turn of the second lap, the pace car's lights flashed and it veered off into the pit lane. The green flag waved frantically, and 16 vehicles surged forward like unleashed predators. The roar of engines reached a fever pitch as each driver pushed for early advantage. Maggie held her position initially, wary of the first lap chaos that often resulted in race-ending collisions. Around her, vehicles jockeyed aggressively, looking for openings to advance. The Charger ahead of her drifted slightly wide on the first turn, leaving a gap on the inside. Maggie considered the opening, then decided against the risky early move. Patience had been her father's first lesson about racing. "The checkered flag isn't waved on the first lap," he'd always said. By the third lap, the field had settled into a rhythm. Carson's Mustang had established a commanding lead, followed by a tight pack of 5 vehicles fighting for second position. Maggie maintained 8th place, conserving her engine while learning the subtle features of the track, which sections had the best grip. Where other drivers were making small mistakes, she could potentially exploit later. The race announcer kept up a steady commentary, occasionally remarking on the surprising performance of the rusty pickup in 8th position, but most of the attention remained focused on Carson and his closest challengers. As they approached the 10th lap, Maggie began to make her move. The Toyota behind her had been riding her bumper aggressively, looking for an opportunity to pass. Using this pressure to her advantage, she drafted closely behind the Charger ahead, through the back straight, then swung out wide and accelerated hard into the turn, carrying her momentum through to claim 7th position. The crowd's reaction was audible even over the engine noise, surprise and appreciation for the unexpected pass. The announcer's voice rose with renewed interest. "And the Ford pickup makes a move! Maggie Reeves showing she's not just here to participate." Emboldened by the successful pass, Maggie set her sights on the 6th-place driver, a Chevy Nova that was taking corners too cautiously. For 3 laps, she studied its driver's patterns, noting how he braked earlier than necessary before each turn. On lap 14, she timed her move perfectly, maintaining higher speed through the curve while he hesitated, and slipped past into 6th position. The mandatory pit window was approaching, adding strategic complexity to the race. Some drivers would pit early to gain the advantage of fresh tires and fuel, while others would wait until the last possible moment to minimize time spent off the track. Maggie watched as Carson and 2 other frontrunners dove into the pits at the end of lap 15. She chose to stay out, gaining track position at the cost of increasingly worn tires. By lap 20, she had moved up to 3rd place as more competitors completed their pit stops. "Mom's in 3rd!" Danny's excited voice crackled through the handheld radio Ray had given her. "When are you pitting?" "2 more laps," she replied during a brief straight section. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine. Everyone's talking about you." Maggie smiled despite the intensity of her concentration. She could push the truck a bit longer before pitting, but she didn't want to risk mechanical issues from running too long on the existing fuel. At the end of lap 22, she signaled and pulled into pit lane. The contrast between her makeshift pit crew and the others was stark. Where professional-looking teams in matching uniforms wielded pneumatic tools with practiced precision, Ray, Danny, and Mike Jenkins stood ready with the basic equipment borrowed from various sources. But what they lacked in presentation, they made up for in determination. As Maggie stopped in their designated spot, they sprang into action. Ray began refueling using a specialized container Mike had procured. Mike worked on checking and adjusting. Tire pressures. Not a full tire change as some teams were doing, but the best they could manage with their limited resources. Danny, despite Maggie's earlier objections, had been given the task of quickly wiping the windshield and giving a final thumbs up when everything was ready. Their pit stop took nearly twice as long as the professional teams, but they completed all necessary tasks without incident. As Maggie prepared to pull away, Danny leaned toward her window. "Carson's having engine trouble," he shouted over the noise. "They're saying it might be overheating." This unexpected information sent a jolt of adrenaline through Maggie as she accelerated back onto the track. She had rejoined in 8th position due to their slower pit stop, but the race dynamics had shifted during those brief minutes off track. The announcer confirmed what Danny had told her. "Looks like our leader is experiencing some issues. Scott Carson's Mustang is showing signs of overheating, and his pace has dropped significantly in the last 2 laps. This could dramatically change the complexion of this race, folks." Maggie settled back into race rhythm, taking stock of the situation. Carson had fallen to 4th, but was still running. The current leader, a black Camaro that had been in 2nd place before the pit stops, was pushing hard to establish a commanding lead while Carson struggled over the next 10 laps. Maggie methodically worked her way forward, passing 3 cars with carefully timed maneuvers. Her truck's raw power gave her advantages on the straightaways, while the custom suspension her father had installed performed better than anyone expected on the turns. By lap 35, she had clawed her way to 5th position. The crowd's energy had shifted noticeably, with cheers erupting each time the battered blue pickup completed a successful pass. The announcer had abandoned any pretense of impartiality, his voice rising with excited disbelief as the unlikely contender continued to advance. Carson's Mustang was still running, but had fallen to 6th place, just behind Maggie. Through her rearview mirror, she could see him pushing his vehicle harder, clearly frustrated at being overtaken by the truck he had mocked earlier. As they entered lap 40, the race had developed into a tight contest between the Camaro in 1st, a modified Dodge Challenger in 2nd, a Ford Thunderbird in 3rd, and an older Chevy Nova in 4th. Maggie's truck remained in 5th, with Carson's struggling Mustang close behind. The Nova ahead of her was showing signs of tire wear, drifting slightly on corners as grip diminished. Maggie patiently waited for the right moment, then accelerated, hard coming out of turn 2, pulling alongside and then ahead in a clean pass that brought a roar from the crowd. 4th place with 10 laps remaining. The top 3 had established a small gap, running close together in their battle for the lead. Maggie pushed the truck harder, asking more from the engine than she had all race. The temperature gauge crept upward, but remained within safe limits, a testament to her father's engineering and her own meticulous maintenance. Carson, meanwhile, had seemingly abandoned caution in his damaged vehicle, pushing his overheating engine to dangerous levels in an attempt to reclaim positions. He managed to pass the Nova and set his sights on Maggie's truck. With 7 laps to go, Maggie had closed the distance to the leading pack. The Thunderbird in 3rd position was struggling with brake issues, smoke occasionally visible from its wheels during hard cornering. She drafted behind it through the back straight on lap 44, then swung wide and powered past, the truck's engine roaring as it claimed 3rd position. The crowd was on its feet now, the unlikely story of the day developing into something remarkable. The announcer could barely contain his excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, with just 6 laps remaining, Maggie Reeves has moved into 3rd place in a vehicle that looks like it belongs in a junkyard, but is performing like a thoroughbred. This is what racing is all about." The Challenger in 2nd and the Camaro in 1st were now within striking distance, though both were running strong. Maggie focused intensely, looking for any weakness, any opportunity, Behind her, Carson's Mustang had somehow reclaimed fourth position despite its issues, the driver seemingly willing to risk complete engine failure in pursuit of a higher finish. On lap 46, disaster struck the lead Camaro. A tire blew on the front straight, sending the vehicle into a controlled spin. The driver managed to avoid a crash, but was forced to limp toward the pits, effectively eliminating him from contention. Suddenly, Maggie found herself in second place. With 4 laps remaining, only the challenger ahead of her. The gap was significant, but not insurmountable, approximately 3 seconds of track time. Carson had moved into third, his Mustang's engine audibly straining as he pushed it beyond reasonable limits. "You can catch him, Mom!" Danny's voice came through the radio, trembling with excitement. "His rear tires are starting to go." Maggie had noticed the same thing. The challenger was beginning to slide slightly on corner exits, a telltale sign of diminishing grip. She calibrated her approach carefully, preserving her own tires while pushing for maximum speed on the straights, where her truck's powerful engine gave her an advantage. With 2 laps remaining, she had halved the gap to the leader. The announcer's voice had risen to a fever pitch. "We're witnessing something extraordinary here at Riverdale Speedway. The single mom in the rusty pickup is hunting down our leader." The challenger driver was clearly aware of the threat, taking defensive lines through corners to make passing difficult. Maggie remained patient, knowing that rushing a move could result in a race-ending mistake. As they took the white flag signaling the final lap, the gap had shrunk to less than a second. Behind them, Carson's Mustang had fallen back, the overheating engine finally forcing him to reduce speed or risk complete failure. The moment came in the back straight of the final lap. The challenger drifted slightly wide, exiting turn 2, its rear tires struggling for traction. Maggie saw her opening and committed fully, pushing the accelerator to the floor and steering her truck into the inside line. For a brief moment, they ran side by side, neither yielding as the final turn approached. The challenger tried to shift inside to block her, but moved a fraction too late. Maggie held her line. The trucks laboriously maintained brakes, allowing her to carry speed through the corner while maintaining control. As they exited the final turn onto the front straight, Maggie's truck edged ahead by half a car length. The challenger driver made a desperate push, but the rusty blue pickup crossed the finish line first by less than a foot. The roar from the crowd was deafening, drowning out even the engines as Maggie lifted her foot from the accelerator, scarcely believing what had just happened. The checkered flag waved frantically as she began her cool-down lap, the reality of victory slowly penetrating through the haze of adrenaline and concentration. "She did it!" the announcer screamed, professionalism abandoned in the moment. "Margaret Reeves in the 1978 Ford pickup has won the Riverdale Stock Car Challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed racing history." The victory lane at Riverdale Speedway had seen its share of celebrations over the years, champagne-soaked. Racing suits, triumphant fist pumps, team owners embracing drivers amid clouds of tire smoke. But it had never witnessed anything quite like the scene that unfolded as Maggie's battered blue truck rolled to a stop in the designated winner's circle. Danny reached her first, somehow slipping past the race officials who were still processing the unexpected outcome. His thin arms wrapped around her waist the moment she stepped down from the cab, his face pressed against her racing suit as tears of joy streamed down his cheeks. Ray followed moments later, his weathered face split by a grin so wide it seemed to stretch his beard to its limits. "You did it! You did it!" Danny kept repeating, his voice muffled against the fireproof material. Maggie knelt to his eye level, removing her helmet to reveal cheeks flushed with exertion and eyes bright with mingled disbelief and triumph. "We did it," she corrected, pulling him close again. "All of us." Ray placed one massive hand on her shoulder, his gruff voice uncharacteristically thick with emotion. "Jack's watching, girl. Damn proud right now." The officials approached with the oversized ceremonial check and trophy, looking somewhat bemused at the rusty truck that now occupied the space usually reserved for gleaming racing machines. A small crowd of reporters followed, cameras flashing, microphones extended. The local news crew that had interviewed her earlier now jostled for position, with journalists from larger regional outlets who had sensed a compelling story unfolding. The Speedway's manager, a portly man in an ill-fitting suit, stepped forward. With the trophy, a silver cup mounted on a wooden base with a checkered flag motif. "Congratulations, Ms. Reeves," he said, his voice carrying through the PA system. "That was unexpected racing." A ripple of laughter ran through the gathered crowd, which had swelled as spectators pressed forward for a better view of the unlikely champion. "Thank you," Maggie replied, accepting the trophy with hands that still trembled slightly from the prolonged adrenaline rush. "This means more than you know," the manager nodded toward Danny. "We understand what you're racing for. Which is why I'm pleased to announce that Jenkins Automotive Parts has agreed to match the prize money, bringing your total winnings to $40,000 today." A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by enthusiastic applause. Maggie stood speechless, the trophy forgotten in her hands as she processed this information. $40,000, enough to cover Danny's treatments for nearly a year, enough to save their home from foreclosure with something left over for a safety net. Additionally, the manager continued, clearly enjoying the moment, several local businesses have pledged contributions to your son's medical fund after witnessing today's race. The current total of those pledges stands at approximately $15,000 and counting. Danny's eyes widened to almost comical proportions. "Mom," he whispered, tugging at her sleeve, "that's $55,000. Before Maggie could respond, a familiar figure pushed through the crowd. Mike Jenkins, the vehicle inspector who had helped with their pit stop. He approached with the confident stride of someone used to commanding attention. "Make that 56,000, he announced loudly. "And a job offer if you want it, Ms. Reeves. Jenkins Automotive isn't just a parts supplier. We also run a custom performance shop. Anyone who can maintain an engine like that one," he gestured toward her truck, "deserves better than working at a general garage. We pay top dollar for top talent." Maggie's hand flew to her mouth, overwhelmed by the rapid turn of events. An hour ago, she had been a desperate single mother facing financial ruin. Now, improbably, she stood amid a shower of opportunities that could fundamentally change their lives. Thank you," she managed finally. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," Jenkins replied with a wink. "After you enjoy your victory." The formal trophy presentation proceeded, with photographers capturing the moment the oversized check was handed over. Danny insisted on helping hold it, his small hands gripping one corner while Maggie supported the other, both smiling with a mixture of joy and disbelief. As the official ceremonies concluded, the reporters surged forward, questions overlapping. In an eager cacophony, "How does it feel to be the first woman to win the Riverdale Challenge? Did you expect your truck to perform so well? What will you do with the prize money? Are you planning to race professionally now?" Maggie answered as best she could, emphasizing that the victory wasn't about breaking gender barriers or proving anything to critics. It was about helping her son. She credited her father's mechanical genius for the truck's performance and expressed gratitude for the community's unexpected generosity. Throughout the interviews, she maintained a calm dignity that contrasted sharply with the celebration erupting around her. Only those who knew her well, Ray and Danny, could see the subtle signs of how deeply the moment affected her. The slight tremor in her hands, the occasional glisten in her eyes when she mentioned her father or Danny's medical needs. Most of the other competitors had quietly dispersed after the race, accepting their defeat with varying degrees of grace. But as the media scrum began to thin, Scott Carson approached the winner's circle. His racing suit was stained with sweat and engine fluids, his expression difficult to read as he stopped a few feet from Maggie. The remaining reporters immediately sensed potential drama, cameras swinging to capture the interaction between the pre-race favorite and the unlikely victor. Carson seemed to notice the attention, hesitating briefly before extending his hand. "Congratulations," he said, his voice carrying just enough for the nearby microphones to pick up. "That was impressive driving." Maggie shook his hand firmly. "Thank you. Sorry about your engine troubles." A flicker of something, perhaps grudging respect, crossed Carson's face. "No excuses. Better truck, better driver today." He paused, then added more quietly, "Hope it helps your kid." With that surprisingly gracious acknowledgement, he turned and walked away, leaving Maggie to wonder if perhaps her initial assessment of the man had been incomplete. As the crowd finally began to disperse, Maggie, Ray, and Danny stood in a small circle of relative calm amid the receding chaos. The truck sat beside them, its mismatched panels and rusted fenders now somehow transformed in the eyes of those who had witnessed the race. What had once seemed merely dilapidated now carried an aura of concealed power, of potential hidden beneath an unassuming exterior. "Can we go get ice cream?" Danny asked, his voice bringing Maggie back to the moment. Despite the monumental events of the day, despite the medical and financial implications, despite the potential career opportunities suddenly laid before them, he was still just a 12-year-old boy who had watched his mom do something amazing and wanted to celebrate with ice cream. Maggie laughed, the sound carrying a release of tension she hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. Ice cream sounds perfect. As they prepared to leave, Ray helping to load their minimal gear back into the truck, a young girl approached hesitantly. Perhaps 9 or 10 years old, she clutched a race program and a pen, her eyes fixed on Maggie with undisguised admiration. "Excuse me, Miss Reeves," she said, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the dispersing crowd. Could I have your autograph, please?" "I'm hardly a hero," Maggie protested. "I just drove a car around in circles." "Nonsense," Mrs. Wilson replied. "You showed this entire town what determination looks like. Besides," she added with a wink toward Danny, "it's not every day we get to see one of our own on television, making Riverdale proud." The gathering had the spontaneous warmth of communities that still remembered how to come together without formal invitations or digital coordination. Someone had brought a portable TV and set up a recorded replay of the race, with neighbors gathered around it, cheering as if the outcome was still uncertain. Others crowded around Danny, asking for his first-hand account of watching from the pits. Maggie found herself at the center of attention in a way she had never experienced before. Neighbors she normally exchanged nothing more than brief greetings with, now approached with genuine interest and congratulations. Parents whose children went to school with Danny shared stories of how they had leaped from their couches when her truck crossed the finish line first. "My Ralph hasn't shouted that loud since the Super Bowl," confided Mrs. Abernathy, whose husband coached Little League in the summers. "Said it was the best race he's seen in 20 years. As the celebration continued, more unexpected visitors arrived. The mechanics from Johnson's Auto, Maggie's co-workers, who had often covered shifts when Danny's medical appointments required her absence, pulled up in a caravan of their personal vehicles. They had pooled money to buy a large sheet cake decorated with a surprisingly detailed rendition of the blue truck crossing a checkered line. Even more surprising was the arrival of her boss, Frank Johnson himself, a taciturn man in his 60s, who rarely socialized with employees and had been known to grumble about Maggie's necessary schedule adjustments, despite her consistently excellent work. "Hell of a race, Reeves," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Always knew you were good with engines, but didn't realize you could drive like that." "Thank you for coming, Mr. Johnson," Maggie replied, genuinely touched by his presence. and for being flexible with my schedule all these years. It's meant more than you know." Johnson shifted uncomfortably, unused to emotional exchanges. "Well, about that. Heard Jenkins made you an offer today. News traveled fast in small towns." Maggie nodded cautiously. "He did. I haven't decided anything yet." "Can't match his money," Johnson stated flatly. "But I can offer partnership. Been thinking about it for a while anyway. Getting too old to run the place alone, and you know the business inside and out." He handed her a folded piece of paper. "Terms are there. Think about it. No rush." Before she could formulate a response, Johnson had already moved away, gravitating toward Ray and a discussion about carburetor adjustments. Maggie stared at the folded paper, another unexpected turn in a day filled with them. A partnership at Johnson's would mean security, flexibility for Danny's needs, and eventually, perhaps, full ownership of a business she had helped build over the past 8 years. She tucked the paper into her pocket, alongside Jenkins' business card, options that hadn't existed that morning now competing for her consideration. The weight of unexpected possibility felt almost as overwhelming as the burden of impossible medical bills had just hours earlier. As darkness settled over the neighborhood, someone produced marshmallows and roasting sticks, transforming the celebration into an impromptu cookout centered around a small fire pit that Tyler's father had rolled into Maggie's yard. Children clustered around the flames under careful supervision, faces sticky with chocolate and graham cracker crumbs. Danny sat among them, his thin frame dwarfed by Tyler's football player build, but his eyes brighter and more animated than Maggie had seen in months. For once, he wasn't the sick kid or the boy with the rare blood disorder. He was the son of the woman who had won the big race, a position that granted him temporary celebrity status among his peers. Watching him laugh and gesture dramatically as he recounted details of the victory, Maggie felt a surge of hope, stronger than any she had allowed herself since his diagnosis. The financial burden that had crushed them for months had lifted substantially. New medical possibilities had emerged. For the first time, she could see a future where Danny's illness was a challenge they faced with adequate resources rather than a desperate battle against insurmountable odds. "He looks happy," a voice observed beside her. Maggie turned to find Lisa Chen, Danny's doctor, holding a paper plate with a half-eaten slice of cake. "Dr. Chen, I didn't know you were here," Maggie said, surprised to see the pediatric hematologist outside the clinical setting where they usually interacted. "I caught the race on TV at the hospital," Dr. Chen explained with a smile. "The nurses in oncology were all cheering for you. When I finished my shift, I thought I'd stop by to offer congratulations in person." She nodded toward Danny. "It's good to see him enjoying himself. That's as important for his recovery as any treatment. There might be new treatment options soon," Maggie shared, explaining Jenkins' connection to the program in Memphis. "Do you think it could help?" Dr. Chen considered this thoughtfully. "I'm familiar with their work. It's cutting edge, and they've had promising results with similar conditions. I'd need to review Danny's specific case with their team, but yes, it could potentially make a significant difference." She placed a hand lightly on Maggie's arm. "This is wonderful news on all fronts. Reduced financial stress for you means reduced physical stress for Danny. Mind and body are connected in ways we're only beginning to understand scientifically." As the evening progressed, the celebration gradually shifted from Maggie's victory to broader community connections. Neighbors who had lived on the same street for years but rarely spoke beyond casual greetings now engaged in extended conversations. Children organized an impromptu game of flashlight tag that spanned several adjoining yards. The invisible barriers of routine and privacy that typically separated households had temporarily dissolved, creating a village-like atmosphere that felt both novel and deeply familiar, as if awakening some ancestral memory of communal living. Around 9 o'clock, Mrs. Wilson approached Maggie again. "There's someone else here to see you," she said, gesturing toward a car that had just pulled up, a sleek black Mercedes that seemed out of place among the modest vehicles lining the street. From it emerged a tall woman in a tailored pantsuit, her salt and pepper hair cut in a precise bob that framed sharp, intelligent features. She carried a leather portfolio and moved with the confident precision of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Margaret Reeves?" she inquired, extending a hand as she approached. "I'm Victoria Hargrove, executive producer at BSN Sports. I was hoping we might have a few minutes to talk." Maggie shook the offered hand, bewildered by this new development. "BSN Sports? The national network?" "The very same," Victoria confirmed, with a brief smile. "Your story caught fire on social media this afternoon. The video of your victory has over 2 million views already, and our viewers are responding strongly to the narrative elements. Single mom, underdog vehicle, racing for her son's medical treatment. It's compelling content by any measure." The K thought that millions of strangers had watched her race was disorienting. Maggie had been focused solely on the prize money and the local impact, never considering that the story might resonate beyond Riverdale. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked cautiously. Victoria gestured toward the house. "Perhaps we could speak somewhere a bit quieter." Maggie led her to the front porch, where the ambient noise of the celebration was muted enough for conversation. They sat on the weathered bench that had been her father's favorite spot for summer evenings. "We'd like to feature your story on our Champions Beyond Sport series," Victoria explained, opening her portfolio to reveal preliminary mock-ups of promotional materials. "It's a 30-minute segment showcasing athletes and competitors whose impact extends beyond their sporting achievement. We typically film at the subject's home, workplace, and significant locations, then conduct a sit-down interview to tie it all together." Maggie blinked in surprise. Throughout her life, she'd been many things: a daughter, a mechanic, a mother, a widow, but never someone whose signature was sought after. The request struck her as surreal, yet deeply touching. "Of course," she replied, taking the offered program and pen. "What's your name?" "Lily," the girl answered, watching with rapt attention as Maggie signed. "My dad says girls can't race, but I told him you proved that wrong." Maggie handed the program back, considering her response carefully. "Your dad's right that racing isn't easy for anyone," she said eventually. "But he's wrong if he thinks being a girl makes it impossible. The track doesn't care who you are, just how well you drive and how hard you're willing to work." Lily nodded solemnly, clutching the signed program to her chest. "I'm going to work really hard," she declared with absolute certainty. "Then I might be asking for your autograph someday," Maggie replied with a smile. As Lily skipped away to rejoin her parents, Danny tugged at Maggie's sleeve again. "You're famous now, Mom." "Hardly," she scoffed. "By next week, everyone will have forgotten about today." Ray shook his head, loading the last of their borrowed tools into his pickup. "Don't be so sure about that. Stories like this have a way of sticking with people." He was more prescient than any of them realized at that moment. By the time they reached Daisy's ice cream parlor 15 minutes later, the shop was abuzz with talk of the race. Several patrons approached their table to offer congratulations, and the owner insisted their order was on the house for Riverdale's newest champion. The digital age ensured that news traveled faster than ever before. While Danny savored his chocolate sundae, Maggie's phone began vibrating with notifications. The crowdfunding page she had established months ago for Danny's medical expenses, which had previously generated only modest support from friends and community members, was suddenly flooded with donations. "Mom, look!" Danny exclaimed, peering over her shoulder at the screen. "The numbers keep changing." Indeed, the total was climbing rapidly as the story spread. Many contributions were small, $5 or $10 from people touched by the narrative of a mother's determination to help her child. Others were more substantial, accompanied by messages of support and admiration. By the time they finished their ice cream, the online donations had surpassed $20,000, bringing their day's total to over $75,000. Ray watched the numbers climb with a gruff satisfaction. Jack always said that engine would change your life someday. Don't think even he imagined how. Maggie nodded, a lump forming in her throat as she thought of her father. The hours he had spent tinkering with the truck, his patient explanations of each component's function, his insistence that she learn not just how things worked, but why they worked that way. The engine had been his legacy, his gift to her long before either of them knew how desperately she would need it. "I wish he could have seen today," she said softly. "He saw," Ray replied with absolute certainty. "Trust me on that." The bell above. The ice cream parlor door jingled as a new customer entered. Mike Jenkins, the automotive parts magnate who had matched the prize money and offered Maggie a job. He spotted their table and approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to making things happen. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said, removing his Riverdale Speedway cap. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" Maggie gestured to the empty chair at their table. "Please, and thank you again for your generosity today. It's going to make a tremendous difference for Danny's treatments." Jenkins settled into the chair, his expression suggesting he had more on his mind than simple congratulations. "That's actually what I wanted to talk about. My grandson's leukemia treatments were covered by a special program at Children's Hospital in Memphis. I've been making some calls, and I think Danny might qualify for the same program." Danny straightened in his seat, ice cream temporarily forgotten. "What kind of program?" "Clinical trials for new treatments, plus a foundation that helps cover costs not managed by insurance," Jenkins explained. "My daughter-in-law's on the hospital board. She's already spoken to the program director about your case." Maggie leaned forward, hope and caution warring in her expression. "That sounds almost too good to be true." "It's competitive," Jenkins acknowledged. "Not everyone qualifies, but based on what I know of Danny's condition, he has a good chance. At minimum, it could reduce your out-of-pocket costs significantly." The potential implications were staggering, even with today's financial windfall. Danny's ongoing treatments would eventually strain their resources again. A program that provided sustained support could change everything. "And the job offer?" Maggie asked. "Was that related to this?" Jenkins shook his head. "Completely separate. That was business, plain and simple. I recognize talent when I see it. And anyone who can keep a 30-year-old engine performing like that belongs in performance vehicles, not changing oil at a general garage." He slid a business card across the table. 20% higher salary than you're making now, plus benefits and profit sharing. We can discuss details whenever you're ready." As Jenkins departed with a promise to be in touch about the medical program, Ray let out a low whistle. When it rains, it pours, doesn't it? One race, and your whole life turns upside down. Maggie stared at the business card, then at her son, then at the phone still displaying the rising donation total. "It doesn't seem real," she admitted. "Oh, it's real," Ray assured her, "and well-deserved. You've been fighting uphill long enough, Maggie. Maybe the universe decided it was time for a downhill stretch." They finished their ice cream and made their way back to the parking lot, where the rusty blue truck sat between Ray's pickup and a shiny new SUV. In the fading evening light, the truck's battered exterior seemed to glow with a peculiar dignity, a testament to the principle that true value often lies beneath the surface. As Maggie unlocked the door, Danny ran his hand along the faded blue fender. "We're not going to fix it up now, are we, even though we have money?" "Fix what up?" Maggie asked, genuinely puzzled. "The outside," Danny clarified. "I kind of like it this way. It's like a secret how special it really is." Maggie smiled, ruffling his hair. I think your grandpa would agree. Besides, she added with a wink, imagine the look on people's faces the next time we show up at the track. The drive home took them past familiar landmarks that somehow seemed different in the wake of the day's events. The for sale sign on Mercer's Field, the boarded-up West Side diner, the community center with its perpetually postponed renovation plans, all the small symbols of a town struggling to maintain its identity in changing economic times. As they approached their modest home, a small three-bedroom ranch that had been in danger of foreclosure just that morning, Maggie was struck by the sight of several cars parked along the street. Neighbors stood in small clusters on the sidewalk, and a hand-painted banner hung between two trees in the front yard. "Congratulations, Maggie and Danny." "What in the world?" she murmured, slowing the truck. The impromptu neighborhood celebration caught Maggie completely off guard. As she parked the truck in her driveway, familiar faces approached from all directions. The elderly couple from across the street, who often watched Danny when she worked late shifts, the middle school math teacher who had been tutoring Danny. During his extended absences, the postal carrier who had quietly been setting aside the more threatening-looking envelopes from collection agencies on days when Danny collected the mail. Someone had set up a folding table with punch and cookies on her front lawn. Battery-powered fairy lights had been strung between trees, creating a festive atmosphere against the deepening twilight. A small speaker played music from someone's portable playlist, and children darted between adults with the limitless energy of youth. "Mrs. Wilson called everyone after she saw you win on the local broadcast," Danny's best friend Tyler explained as he rushed up to greet them. "She said it was time for a proper celebration." Mrs. Wilson herself approached moments later, a retired school secretary who had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years and functioned as its unofficial matriarch. "Don't look so shocked, Margaret," she said, enveloping Maggie in a firm hug that smelled of lavender and baking spices. "You think we wouldn't celebrate the local hero?" Maggie studied the materials with growing disbelief. "And you want to do this about me just because I won a local race?" Victoria leaned forward slightly, her expression intensifying. "Ms. Reeves, surely you understand that what resonates with audiences isn't just the victory, it's the context. A struggling single mother using her late father's handcrafted engine to win against professional competitors, all to save her son from crushing medical debt. That's not just a sports story, it's a human story," she continued. Before Maggie could respond, "We're prepared to offer a standard appearance fee of $15,000, plus travel expenses if we decide to film any segments outside Riverdale." Another $15,000. The number seemed almost abstract now, adding to a surreal tally that had transformed their financial reality in the span of a single day. But something about the polished presentation and Victoria's carefully modulated enthusiasm triggered Maggie's natural caution. "And what would this involve for Danny?" she asked. "His health has to come first. He tires easily, and too much excitement can affect his condition." Victoria nodded with practiced understanding. "Of course, we would work entirely around his medical needs and energy levels. His participation could be as limited as you deem appropriate, perhaps just a few minutes of footage showing your relationship, which is central to the narrative." The word narrative bothered Maggie slightly, as if their lives were being viewed as story components rather than lived experiences. She glanced across the yard to where Danny was now sitting by the fire, his energy clearly flagging after the long, emotional day. "I'd need to think about it," she said finally, "and discuss it with Danny. This has all happened very quickly." "Absolutely understandable," Victoria agreed smoothly, closing her portfolio and extracting a business card. "Take whatever time you need, but I should mention that timing matters in media. Your story is gaining traction now. If we move forward, we'd ideally begin production within the next 2 weeks while public interest remains high." As Victoria departed with promises to follow up, Maggie remained on the porch, turning the embossed business card over in her hands. The day's events had cascaded with such speed and magnitude that she felt like she was still caught in the race, reflexively responding to each new turn without time to process the overall trajectory. Ray appeared in the doorway, 2 mugs of coffee in his weathered hands. "Saw you talking with the fancy lady from the city," he said, settling beside her and offering one of the mugs. "More good news?" "Another opportunity," Maggie replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "A TV feature about today's race and, well, about us. Our story." She looked at him uncertainly. "Is it wrong that it makes me uncomfortable? All this attention, people suddenly interested in our lives when we've been struggling alone for so long?" Ray sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Nothing wrong with being cautious, but remember, connections are how most folks get by in this world. Maybe all this attention is just people finally seeing what was always there. Your strength, your determination, your father's legacy." The mention of her father brought a lump to Maggie's throat. Throughout the celebration, she had felt his absence acutely, knowing how proudly he would have watched her race, how he would have beamed at the recognition of his mechanical genius, how he would have lifted Danny onto his shoulders in celebration. "Do you think he'd approve of all this?" she asked quietly. "Using his truck to become some kind of story for people to consume?" Ray's weathered face softened with understanding. "Jack never built that engine to sit idle, Maggie. He built it to run, to perform, to accomplish things. Today it did exactly that, in the most important way possible. It opened doors for Danny's future." He placed a calloused hand over hers. "Besides, your daddy never met a spotlight he didn't like. He'd be eating all this attention up with a spoon." The observation startled a laugh from Maggie because it was true. Her father had been a natural storyteller, the center of attention at any gathering, always ready with an embellished tale of mechanical triumph or racing glory. He would have reveled in today's events, probably adding dramatic details with each retelling. As the neighborhood celebration began to wind down, parents collecting tired children, older neighbors excusing themselves with final congratulations, Maggie found herself mentally cataloguing the day's improbable sequence of events: the victory against all expectations, the doubled prize money, the community donations, the job offers, the medical program possibility, and now a national television interest. Any one of these developments would have been life-changing. Together, they represented a complete rewriting of the future she had grimly anticipated just that morning. A future of mounting debt, inadequate treatment options, and eventual loss of their home. Danny approached the porch, his steps slowed by fatigue, but his eyes still bright with excitement. "Mrs. Wilson said I should probably get some rest," he reported, clearly hoping his mother might countermand this sensible suggestion. "She's right," Maggie confirmed, rising to guide him inside. "It's been a big day for both of us." "The biggest," Danny agreed as they entered the house, the sounds of departing neighbors fading behind them. "Mom, is everything really going to be okay now, with the money and everything?" The question carried the weight of months of overheard phone calls with insurance companies, glimpsed past-due notices, and the constant undercurrent of financial worry that children absorb even when adults try to shield them. Maggie drew him close, feeling the butterfly-wing delicacy of his shoulder blades beneath her hands. "Yes," she said with newfound certainty, "we have options now, and good people helping us. The treatments will be covered, our house is safe, and there's even money for some non-essentials." Danny's eyes widened slightly at this last point. "Non-essentials? Like maybe a gaming console?" he suggested with calculated casualness. Maggie laughed, the sound echoing through their small living room that suddenly seemed filled with possibility rather than limitation. "We'll see. First priorities are your health and our home. But yes, there might be room for some fun things too. As she helped him prepare for bed, a routine that had become increasingly medicalized in recent months, with medications to be intaken, symptoms to be monitored, side effects to be managed, Maggie realized that the day's miracle wasn't just financial. It was the transformation she saw in Danny himself, the renewed energy, the expressions of hope rather than stoic endurance, the simple childhood excitement about potential toys instead of worried questions about bills. When he was finally settled, under his Star Wars comforter, a prized possession from before the illness had forced so many sacrifices, he looked up at her with uncharacteristic seriousness. "I knew you would win," he said quietly, "even when everyone laughed at the truck." "How could you be so sure?" Maggie asked, smoothing his hair back from his forehead, a gesture that had become automatic during hospital stays and fever checks. "Because you never give up," he answered. "Simply. Not on the truck, not on our house, and not on me. That's why you had to win. That's how stories work." The childlike certainty in his logic brought a fresh wave of emotion. Perhaps that was the real miracle, not the unlikely victory, or the financial reversal, but the fact that despite everything, her son still believed in the fundamental fairness of the universe, still trusted that persistence and love would ultimately prevail against any obstacle. "Get some sleep," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Tomorrow, we start figuring out our new normal." As Danny drifted towards sleep, Maggie moved through the quiet house, turning out lights and gathering abandoned coffee mugs. Through the front window, she could see Ray still sitting on the porch, keeping unofficial vigil, as the last few neighbors departed. Beyond him, barely visible in the darkness, sat the battered blue truck, its mismatched panels and rusted fenders now transformed from symbols of hardship into emblems of unlikely triumph. Morning arrived with the subtle disorientation that follows life-changing events, that brief moment of waking when the mind must reconcile old realities with new circumstances. Maggie opened her eyes to familiar surroundings. The small bedroom, with its faded floral wallpaper she'd never found time to replace, the dresser with its collection of framed photos, the window overlooking the maple tree in the side yard. Then memory flooded back. The race, the victory, the prize money, the opportunities that had materialized like mirages suddenly solidifying into tangible form. She reached for her phone, half expecting to discover it had all been an elaborate dream. Instead, she found dozens of notifications, messages from distant friends who had seen viral clips of the race, emails from local businesses offering congratulations and support, updates from the medical fundraising page that continued to attract donations overnight. The reality of yesterday's transformation settled over her, not as the euphoric wave of the celebration, but as a quieter, more substantial awareness of doors that had opened, of breathing room where before there had been only suffocating pressure. The aroma of coffee and bacon drifted from the kitchen, surprising her. Danny wasn't supposed to use the stove unsupervised. His medication sometimes caused dizzy spells that made cooking hazardous. She pulled on a robe and padded down the hallway to find not her son but Ray at the stove, expertly flipping pancakes while bacon sizzled in. "A cast-iron skillet. Morning, champ," he greeted without turning around. "Hope you don't mind. Let myself in with the spare key. Figured you two could use a proper breakfast after yesterday's excitement." "You didn't have to do that," Maggie said, though the gesture touched her deeply. Ray had been her father's best friend for over 30 years, but since Jack's death, he had expanded his role to become something between an uncle and a guardian angel to both Maggie and Danny. "Course I didn't have to," Ray replied, sliding a perfect golden pancake onto a growing stack. "Wanted to. Besides, got news that couldn't wait." Before Maggie could ask what news, Danny emerged from his bedroom, hair tousled from sleep, moving. with the careful deliberation of someone still cataloguing how his body felt each morning, a habit developed through months of medical treatments with unpredictable side effects. "Uncle Ray made pancakes," he announced, his face lighting up at the unexpected treat. Then, with the rapid transition of focus only children can manage. "Mom, have you seen your phone? The video of you winning has like 4 million views now. Tyler texted me. Everyone at school is talking about it." 4 million, Maggie echoed weakly, accepting the mug of coffee Ray handed her. The number seemed abstract, impossible to reconcile with their small-town life. "That's actually part of what I came to talk about," Ray said, gesturing for them to sit at the kitchen table where he'd already set plates and silverware. "Got a call from Jenkins this morning. Remember that TV producer who came by last night? She's not the only one interested. Apparently the morning shows want to book you," ESPN called, "and some company that makes racing equipment wants to talk sponsorship." Maggie lowered herself into a chair, overwhelmed. "Sponsorship? For what?" "I'm not a professional racer." "Not yet," Ray pointed out, serving pancakes to Danny, who immediately drowned them in syrup. "But you beat professionals in that rust bucket. People notice things like that." The idea that yesterday's desperate gamble might open doors to actual racing opportunities had never occurred to Maggie. She had entered the competition solely for the prize money, with no thought beyond addressing their immediate financial crisis. "I'm a mechanic, not a racer," she protested. "Yesterday was an exception." Ray raised a bushy eyebrow as he settled across from them with his own plate. "Your daddy was a mechanic too, but he had racing in his blood. Apple doesn't fall far from what I saw yesterday." While they ate, Ray elaborated on the messages he'd received. Mike Jenkins had apparently appointed himself as an unofficial intermediary, fielding inquiries from various media outlets and businesses interested in Maggie's story. The local Chevrolet dealership wanted her to appear in commercials. A national auto parts chain had expressed interest in a promotional partnership. 3 racing teams from regional circuits had inquired about her driving for them. "It's too much," Maggie said, pushing her half-eaten breakfast away. "I entered one local race to help Danny. I'm not looking to become some kind of public figure." "What about the racing teams?" Danny asked, his eyes wide with excitement. "That would be so cool, Mom. You could be a real race car driver." Hope in his expression tugged at her heart. After months of seeing him subdued by illness and treatment, his renewed enthusiasm was difficult to dismiss. But the practical considerations loomed large in her mind. "Racing costs money, Danny," she explained gently. "Even with teams, drivers often need to bring sponsors. It's not as simple as just showing up and driving." "Jenkins said one of the teams has sponsors already lined up," Ray interjected. "They're looking for a female driver with proven skill to diversify their roster, something about new demographics and marketing opportunities." He shrugged. "I don't pretend to understand all that business talk, but the offer seems genuine." Before Maggie could respond, her phone rang. Frank Johnson, her boss, calling unusually early. She excused herself to take the call in the living room. "Maggie," Johnson began without preamble, "we need to talk about that partnership offer I made yesterday." Her heart sank slightly. She had expected this. In the cold light of morning, her pragmatic employer had likely reconsidered the impulsive offer made during the emotional high of her victory celebration. "I understand if you've changed your mind, Mr. Johnson," she said, striving to keep disappointment from her voice. "It was a generous offer, and I appreciate the gesture." "Changed? My mind?" Johnson sounded genuinely confused. "No, I'm calling because I need to sweeten the deal. Jenkins called me this morning, trying to poach you for his performance shop. Offered you a management position, not just a mechanic slot." He cleared his throat. "I'm prepared to go to 40% ownership, effective immediately with a path." "To majority ownership in 5 years," Maggie sank onto the sofa, stunned by this escalation. 40%? That's extremely generous. It's self-preservation, Johnson countered gruffly. You're the best mechanic I've got, and customers trust you. If you leave, I lose business. Besides, his voice softened slightly. I meant what I said about wanting a partner, getting too old to handle everything myself. Can I have a few days to think about it? Maggie asked. There's suddenly a lot to consider. Take the week, Johnson agreed, but I need to know by Friday. Got to make plans either way. After ending the call, Maggie returned to the kitchen to find Danny enthusiastically explaining to Ray how cool it would be to have a mum who was a professional race car driver. The boy's animation was striking, a brightness in his eyes and expressiveness in his gestures that had been subdued for months as the illness and treatments took their toll. Johnson's offering 40% partnership now, she announced, still processing the information herself. With a path to majority ownership. Ray whistled low. Bidding war for your services. Not bad for a day after your first race. The observation highlighted the absurdity of their situation. 24 hours earlier, Maggie had been desperately hoping to win enough money to stave off foreclosure and continue Danny's treatments. Now, she was fielding competing job offers, potential sponsorships, and media opportunities. I don't even know where to start sorting through all this, she admitted. Start with what matters most, Ray advised simply. The rest will fall into place. What mattered most was clear, Danny's health and their stability. But beyond those essential priorities, the path forward remained uncertain. Racing held an undeniable appeal. The exhilaration she had experienced during yesterday's victory had awakened something long dormant, a passion inherited from her father that had been subordinated to more pressing concerns of survival and single parenthood. Yet the practical side of her, the part that had managed household budgets down to the penny and juggled work schedules around medical appointments, remained wary of abandoning the security of established employment for the unpredictable world of racing, sponsorships, and public attention. As they cleared the breakfast dishes, a knock at the door heralded yet another unexpected visitor. This time, it was Mike Jenkins himself, dressed in business casual attire that suggested he had important meetings planned for the day. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said when Maggie invited him in. "But I wanted to touch base in person about the opportunities we discussed yesterday, and some new developments." Jenkins greeted Danny warmly, presenting him with a small gift bag that contained a professional racing helmet, scaled for a child, but authentic in every detail, including custom graphics featuring Danny's name. "This is amazing!" Danny exclaimed, immediately trying it on. "It fits perfectly. Had it rushed from our custom shop," Jenkins explained with a wink. "Thought you might like it." The thoughtful gesture, recognizing Danny's role in the story, rather than focusing exclusively on Maggie, raised Jenkins several notches in her estimation. As Danny rushed to show Ray his new treasure, Jenkins turned to more serious matters. "I've spoken with my daughter-in-law about the medical program at Children's Hospital," he began. "She's arranged a consultation for Danny next Wednesday. If that works for you, their specialist will review his case and determine if he's eligible for the clinical trial program." The potential for improved medical care for Danny remained the most significant development from yesterday's chain of events. "We'll be there," Maggie confirmed immediately. "Thank you for making that happen so quickly." Jenkins nodded. "As for the other matters, I've been fielding inquiries since dawn. Everyone wants a piece of your story." He withdrew a tablet from his briefcase and pulled up a spreadsheet. "I've taken the liberty of organizing the opportunities by category and potential value, both financial and strategic." The document displayed a meticulously arranged list of offers and inquiries, from media appearances to product endorsements to racing opportunities. Each entry included estimated compensation, time commitment, and Jenkins' notes about pros and cons. "This is extremely thorough," Maggie observed, somewhat overwhelmed by the level of detail. "But why are you doing all this? You barely know us." Jenkins' expression softened. "Initially, it was about the engine. I'm a gearhead at heart, and what your father built, what you maintained, is extraordinary. But after learning about Danny's situation..." He glanced toward the living room, where the boy was showing Ray all the features of his new helmet. "Let's just say my family has personal experience with childhood illness. Sometimes the system works against families who should be focusing on healing, not finances." The explanation rang true, aligning with Jenkins' earlier mention of his grandson's leukemia. There was something comforting about having an experienced business person in their corner, especially one motivated by genuine understanding rather than merely financial opportunity. "I'm not saying you should accept every offer," Jenkins continued, returning to the spreadsheet, "but there's potential here to secure Danny's medical care long-term and create sustainable income streams beyond your primary employment, whether that's with my company, Johnson's, or elsewhere." They spent the next hour reviewing the various opportunities, with Jenkins patiently explaining the implications of each. The racing team offers were particularly complex, involving potential conflicts with product endorsements, exclusivity clauses, and travel commitments that would impact Maggie's ability to maintain regular employment. The Hendrick Racing offer is probably the most flexible, Jenkins noted, highlighting an entry halfway down the list. They're proposing a 6-race commitment for their regional series, scheduled over 8 months. That could potentially work alongside a regular job, especially if your employer is willing to accommodate the occasional Friday absence. The discussions continued into specifics about media appearances, which ones offered the best combination of exposure and compensation, which might lead to further opportunities, which could be coordinated to minimize disruption to Danny's medical appointments and school schedule. Throughout the conversation, Maggie felt increasingly out of her depth. Her life experience had prepared her for handling practical challenges. Fixing engines, managing tight budgets, navigating healthcare bureaucracy for Danny's treatments. It had not equipped her for evaluating media contracts, racing sponsorships, or personal brand development. "This is all a lot," she admitted. "Finally, I don't know how to make these decisions." "You don't have to decide everything today," Jenkins assured her. "But I would recommend accepting the Good Morning America remote interview they're requesting for tomorrow. It's high visibility, relatively low commitment since they'll send a crew here rather than flying you to New York, and they're offering $5,000 for a 5-minute segment. That's good value for your time while you consider the longer-term opportunities." When Jenkins departed, promising to email the spreadsheet and remain available for questions, Maggie found herself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the printed copy he had left behind. The document represented a completely unforeseen future, one with both exciting possibilities and daunting complexities. Ray settled into the chair across from her, having helped Danny set up a video call with his best friend to show off the new helmet. "Lot to take in, isn't it?" he observed. "It doesn't feel real," Maggie confessed. "Yesterday morning I was just trying to figure out how to keep our house and continue Danny's treatments. Now there are TV shows and racing teams and sponsorships." She shook her head. "I keep waiting to wake up. Your daddy always said opportunity doesn't knock. It roars past, and you either jump on or get left in the dust," Ray remarked. "He'd be telling you to grab this with both hands." "But what if I make the wrong choices? What if I get distracted by racing or media attention and it somehow impacts Danny's care? What if—" Ray reached across the table and covered her hand with his weathered one. "Maggie, girl, listen to yourself. You've been making impossible choices and carrying impossible burdens alone for years. You've never once put anything ahead of that boy's welfare. That ain't gonna change just because some opportunities come along." His confidence steadied her, as it had so many times since her father's death. Ray had a gift for cutting through. Complexity to the essential truth of situations, a clarity born from decades of practical living, unburdened by unnecessary overthinking. "So what would you do?" she asked. "If you were me right now, facing all these choices?" Ray considered this for a moment. "I'd remember who I am at my core. Racing ain't just something you did yesterday. It's in your blood from your daddy. Being a mechanic ain't just a job, it's how you understand the world. And being Danny's mom ain't just a responsibility. It's your heart walking around outside your body." He tapped the spreadsheet. "Any path that honors all those truths is the right one." The simple wisdom hit home with more impact than all the detailed analyses Jenkins had provided. Maggie realized she had been approaching the situation as a series of separate decisions about career, racing, media exposure, and financial planning. Ray's perspective illuminated a different approach, finding the path that integrated all the essential elements of her identity rather than forcing artificial choices between them. "I think I need to talk to Danny," she said, rising from the table. "See what he thinks about all this." Ray nodded approvingly. "Boy's got a good head on his shoulders. Gets that from his mother." Danny sat cross-legged on his bed, the racing helmet positioned carefully on his pillow, as if it were a precious artifact in a museum display. He had been video chatting with Tyler, but the call had ended when his friend had to leave for a dentist appointment. Now he was scrolling through social media on his tablet, still slightly dazed by the sudden attention their lives had received. "Can we talk for a minute?" Maggie asked, pausing in his doorway. Danny immediately set the tablet aside, his expression shifting to one of attentiveness that reflected a maturity beyond his 12 years, a side effect of illness that had forced him to confront adult concerns far too early. "Is everything okay?" he asked, the automatic question of a child who had become accustomed to bracing for difficult news. Maggie smiled reassuringly as she sat beside him on the bed. "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. But I wanted to get your thoughts on all these new opportunities that have come up." Danny's face brightened. "You mean like the racing team offers and the TV stuff?" "All of it," Maggie confirmed. "This affects both of us, and I want to make sure we're making decisions together." The simple inclusion in the decision-making process seemed to please Danny immensely. Too often in recent months, conversations about their future had been carefully filtered to shield him from the worst of their financial realities. "What are the options?" he asked, straightening his posture as if preparing for a serious business discussion. Maggie outlined the various opportunities: the partnership offer from Johnson's Garage, the position at Jenkins Performance Vehicles, the racing team contracts, the media appearances and potential endorsement deals. She explained the pros and cons of each as best she could, translating Jenkins' business terminology into concepts Danny could understand. "The most important thing," she emphasized, "is that whatever we decide has to work with your treatments and school schedule. Your health comes first, period." Danny nodded, absorbing the information with surprising focus. When she finished, he was quiet for several moments, his expression thoughtful. "What do you want to do, Mom?" he asked finally. "Not what makes the most money or what's best for me. What would make you happy?" The question caught Maggie off guard. She had become so accustomed to making decisions based solely on practical considerations: financial necessity, Danny's medical needs, logistical feasibility, that the concept of her own happiness as a primary factor seemed almost foreign. I'm not sure," she admitted. "I never really thought about it that way. You looked happy when you were racing, Danny observed. Really happy, like when we used to go camping before I got sick. Not just regular happy like when your favorite.
Show is on.
The distinction touched her deeply, that her son had catalogued different qualities of her happiness, preserving the memory of her unrestrained joy as something precious and rare. I did love it, she acknowledged. It felt like flying, like everything else disappeared except the road ahead and the engine responding to every touch. Like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. She paused, surprised by the emotion in her voice. Your grandfather used to say, that's how you know what you're born for, when time seems to both stop and speed up at once. Danny considered this. So maybe you should race, if that's what makes you feel that way. It's not that simple, Maggie explained. Racing professionally requires sponsors, travel, time commitments. It would mean less stability than a regular job. And what about your treatments? But we have money now, right? From the prize and all the donations, Danny countered. And Mr. Jenkins is helping with that special program at the hospital. Plus, he added with the straightforward logic of childhood, if you do more races and win, that's more money too. His optimism made perfect sense in the simplified economy of a 12-year-old's understanding. Do what you love, win races, earn money, problem solved. The adult complexities of health insurance, mortgage payments, racing season schedules, and sustainable career paths were abstractions to him, yet there was wisdom in his perspective too. The past 24 hours had demonstrated that sometimes the direct path, the one that seemed most improbable, could yield results that cautious planning could never achieve. What if I tried a mixed approach? Maggie suggested, thinking aloud. Maybe accept the partnership with Johnson's Garage for stability, but negotiate flexible hours so I could also commit to the Hendrick Racing Team's 6-race schedule? That would let me try professional racing without risking our basic security. Danny's eyes lit up. You could be like those superhero people who have regular jobs but also secret identities. Mechanic by day, race car driver on weekends. Maggie laughed at the comparison. Not exactly secret, but I take your point. It would be a way to explore racing without putting all our eggs in one basket. And the TV interviews? Danny asked. Are you going to do those? This was the aspect of their new situation that made Maggie most uncomfortable. She had never sought the spotlight, had always preferred letting her work speak for itself rather than calling attention to her accomplishments. I'm not sure, she admitted. Being on camera, having people analyze our lives, it feels invasive. Danny fiddled with the strap of his new helmet, considering this. Tyler says there are lots of people online saying nice things about us, about you being brave and cool for racing to help me. He looked up at her. Maybe telling our story would help other people, like other moms with kids who have medical stuff? The question revealed a generosity of spirit that momentarily took Maggie's breath away. Despite everything he had endured, Danny's instinct was to consider how their experience might benefit others in similar situations. That's a really good point, she said softly. I hadn't thought about it that way. Their conversation continued, exploring different combinations of opportunities and their potential impact on their daily lives. Danny asked insightful questions about practical matters. Would they still live in the same house? Would he need to change schools? Would she still be able to attend his doctor appointments if she took on new professional commitments? Throughout the discussion, Maggie was struck by how the dynamic between them had shifted. Without the crushing weight of financial desperation pressing down on them, they could talk about the future with hope rather than fear, with choices rather than forced compromises. I think I know what we should do, Danny said eventually, with the decisive confidence of someone who had thoroughly analyzed a problem and arrived at the optimal solution. You should accept Mr. Johnson's partnership. Because you like working there and the people are nice. You should race with the Hendrick team, because racing makes you happy. And you should do the TV interviews to help other families, but only the ones that don't interfere with my treatments or your work." The simplicity of his conclusion made Maggie smile. "Just like that, huh?" "Just like that," he confirmed with a nod. "And maybe I could come to some of the races when I'm feeling good. Tyler says his dad would drive us if you're busy getting ready to race." The thought of Danny watching from the stands, well enough to enjoy the experience with his friend, added another layer of appeal to the racing opportunity. It would be something positive they could share, a counterbalance to the medical appointments and treatment side effects that had dominated their relationship for too long. "I think that could be arranged," Maggie agreed. "Now, how about we take a break from all this planning? It's a beautiful day, and we haven't had a picnic at River Park in ages. You feeling up to it?" Danny's enthusiastic response suggested that his energy levels were better than they had been in weeks. Whether it was the excitement of recent events, the relief of financial pressure, or simply a good day in the unpredictable cycle of his condition, Maggie welcomed the glimpse of her lively, adventurous son. They spent the afternoon at the riverside, a park, spreading a blanket in the dappled shade of old oak trees. Danny's appetite was stronger than it had been recently, and he demolished a sandwich with enough energy left over to join a casual game of frisbee with some other children. Maggie watched from the blanket, cataloguing the subtle improvements in his stamina and color, allowing herself to nurture a cautious hope that this might be the beginning of a positive trend. Throughout the afternoon, they were approached by various community members offering congratulations and well wishes. The local librarian mentioned that they had set up a special display of books about automotive history and racing in honor of Maggie's victory. The high school shop teacher asked if she might be willing to speak to his class about engines sometime. A young mother quietly thanked her for showing my daughters that women can succeed in traditionally male spaces. The interactions were brief and generally respectful, but they reinforced the reality that their lives had changed in ways that extended beyond financial circumstances. They had become, at least temporarily, public figures in their small community, symbols that meant different things to different people. As they packed up to leave the park, Maggie noticed a girl about Danny's age hovering nearby, clutching what appeared to be a racing magazine. After several false starts, the girl finally approached, her expression a mixture of determination and nervousness. "Excuse me, Ms. Reeves. I'm Emma. I was wondering—" She held out the magazine and a pen. "Could you maybe sign this? I want to be a racer too when I grow up. And my dad says girls can't, but I saw you win, and now he can't say that anymore." The simple request and its accompanying explanation crystallized something Maggie had been processing since the race. Her victory hadn't been just about the prize money or even Danny's medical needs. It had, through no intention of her own, become a statement about possibility, about defying limitations imposed by others' expectations. "I'd be happy to," she said, accepting the magazine. As she signed, she added, "You know, most great racers start with understanding how engines work. That's even more important than driving fast." Emma nodded seriously. "I'm already learning. My grandpa lets me help when he works on his tractor. I can change the oil by myself now." "That's a perfect start," Maggie assured her. "Keep learning how things work, and don't let anyone tell you what you can't do." As Emma ran back to her waiting family, clutching the signed magazine triumphantly, Danny regarded his mother with a knowing smile. "See, that's why you should do the interviews too, so more girls like Emma can see you." The observation struck Maggie as remarkably perceptive. Her instinct had been to view the media attention as an invasion of privacy, a distraction from more important priorities. Danny saw it differently, as an extension of the impact she could have beyond their immediate circumstances. When they returned home, Ray was waiting on the porch, engaged in animated conversation with Mike Jenkins. The two men had apparently discovered a shared passion for vintage engines and were debating the relative merits of different carburetor designs, with the intensity of sports fans arguing about championship teams. "Perfect timing," Jenkins called as they approached. "I was just about to call you. Good Morning America confirmed for tomorrow morning at 9. They'll send a small crew to set up by 7:30 if that works for you." The reality of national television exposure sent a flutter of anxiety through Maggie's stomach. "That's very soon." "Strike while the iron's hot," Jenkins replied with an apologetic shrug. "These opportunities don't wait around, but it's your call. I can decline if you're not comfortable with it." Maggie glanced at Danny, who gave her an encouraging nod. "No, it's fine," she decided. "But I have a few conditions. Danny's privacy needs to be respected. No detailed discussion of his medical situation beyond the basic facts already public. No filming of our personal spaces without approval. And I want to be able to mention the crowdfunding page for Danny's treatments." Jenkins smiled approvingly. "Already negotiated those exact terms. Great minds think alike. They've agreed to all of it, and they're happy to include the fundraising information as an on-screen graphic during your segment." As they moved inside to discuss further details, Maggie's phone rang. An unknown number with a Nashville area code. Excusing herself to the kitchen to take the call, she was surprised to hear the voice of Scott Carson, her primary competitor from the race. "Reeves? Carson here. Hope I'm not interrupting anything." "No, it's fine," she replied cautiously, uncertain why he would be calling. Their last interaction had been his surprisingly gracious acknowledgement of her victory. "Look, I'll get right to it," Carson continued, his tone businesslike. "My team's been talking. We're impressed with your driving, especially considering the unconventional vehicle. We'd like to discuss a potential collaboration." "Collaboration?" Maggie repeated, confused. "I thought you were with Elite Racing." "I am. What I'm talking about is a special event we're putting together. A charity race, professional drivers paired with promising amateurs, proceeds going to children's medical causes." He paused briefly. "Given your situation and your performance yesterday, you'd be a natural fit. The exposure could help your fundraising efforts, and it would put you in contact with some influential people in the racing world." The offer was unexpected but intriguing. A charity event focused on children's medical needs aligned perfectly with their circumstances, and the networking opportunities could prove valuable if she decided to pursue racing more seriously. "I'd need details, of course," she replied. "Dates, location, time commitment." "Of course," Carson agreed. "We're looking at the first weekend in August at Bristol Motor Speedway. 2-day event, practice and qualifying on Saturday, race on Sunday. Each amateur paired with a pro for coaching and strategy. I can email you the full prospectus." "Why me, specifically?" Maggie asked, the question that had been nagging at her since he mentioned collaboration. "We're not exactly friends." "Carson," there was a moment of silence before he answered, his tone more genuine than she had heard from him previously. "Remember when I made that crack about you being there for attention, about your sob story?" He sighed audibly. "My sister's kid has cystic fibrosis. I've seen what medical bills can do to a family. Been helping them out for years. So when I learned why you were racing that rust bucket, let's just say I recognized the desperation, didn't handle it well, and that's on me." The unexpected personal revelation shifted Maggie's perception of Carson. The aggressive competitor with the dismissive attitude suddenly had dimensions she hadn't anticipated, a depth of understanding that came from personal experience with childhood illness. "I appreciate your honesty," she said finally, "and I'm interested in hearing more about the event. Send me the details, and I'll consider it." As she ended the call and returned to the living room, Maggie felt a sense of possibilities expanding in all directions. The racing world, which had been nothing more than a distant memory of her father's passion, was suddenly opening doors she had never imagined approaching. The charity race invitation suggested that even those opportunities could potentially align with Danny's medical needs rather than competing with them. The conversation in the living room had evolved to include a discussion of the Memphis medical program. Jenkins was explaining that his daughter-in-law had sent Danny's medical records to the program director for preliminary review. "They're cautiously optimistic about his eligibility," Jenkins reported. "His condition matches several of their research protocols. The consultation next week will determine which specific trial would be most appropriate, assuming he qualifies." The possibility of advanced treatment beyond what their local hospital could provide represented perhaps the most significant development from the chain of events set in motion by the race. As valuable as the financial windfall was, access to cutting-edge medical care could make a fundamental difference in Danny's prognosis. As summer faded into autumn, the rusty blue pickup truck sat under a custom cover in Maggie's garage, now more of a cherished artifact than daily transportation. Beside it gleamed a modest but well-maintained sedan, purchased with a portion of their race earnings. Practical, reliable transportation for Danny's regular trips to the Memphis Medical Center, where his participation in the clinical trial was showing remarkable results. The Johnson Reeves garage, as the newly painted sign proclaimed, had expanded its services to include performance vehicle customization, a growing segment that brought customers from 3 counties away. Maggie's partnership had breathed new life into the business, with her racing reputation attracting enthusiasts seeking that extra edge in their engines. On weekends, when she wasn't at the shop, Maggie could be found at regional tracks, the trucks. Rusted panels and mismatched door, now proudly displayed without modification. After 6 successful races with the Hendrick team, 3 additional sponsors had signed on, providing enough income to make part-time racing a sustainable reality. The charity event Carson had organized had raised over $300,000 for children's medical research, with Maggie and Danny's story featured prominently in the national coverage. Their appearance on Good Morning America had led to monthly contributions to their website, where Maggie now shared updates on Danny's treatment progress alongside advice for families navigating similar challenges. Most importantly, Danny was thriving. The experimental treatments had reduced his symptoms dramatically, allowing him to return to school full-time and even join the junior robotics team. His experiences had sparked an interest in medical technology, and he spoke confidently about becoming a biomedical engineer to build cool stuff that helps sick kids. On a crisp October evening, as golden leaves drifted across their driveway, Maggie sat on the porch steps, watching Danny demonstrate his latest robot design to Ray. The simple domesticity of the scene belied the extraordinary journey of the past. 6 months, from desperate gamble to unexpected victory to completely transformed future. Sometimes fate turns on a single moment of courage, the decision to enter a race with nothing but a rusty truck and refusing to accept the mockery that followed. Sometimes salvation comes disguised as an old engine your father left behind, and sometimes, when you're brave enough to ignore those who dismiss your chances, you find yourself crossing finish lines you never dreamed possible. The blue pickup still carried its dents and rust spots proudly. Maggie had refused all offers to restore or repaint it, understanding that its imperfect exterior told an essential part of their story, that true value often lies beneath surfaces others are quick to judge. If you've enjoyed this journey with Maggie and Danny, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us how determination can overcome seemingly impossible odds. Hit that notification bell to never miss our weekly uploads of inspirational tales that prove sometimes life's greatest victories come when everyone else expects defeat. And tell us in the comments, what impossible challenge are you facing that might just be one brave decision away from becoming your greatest triumph?